How to play Warhammer 40K 7th edition.
Hey everyone, welcome to part 3 of my in-depth series on how to play Warhammer 40K 7th edition. As always, my name is Jay, and today I'll be talking about the Force Organization chart, specifically what it is, all the parts of a Force Organization chart, and then afterwards we will actually design a 1,000-point list together. I'll be going over how to design a list. This may not be the most competitive list, but just to go over the rules of designing lists in general. So, let's start off with the obvious question. What exactly is a Force Organization chart? First of all, it's a chart, of course, which designates how many of each role you can take in a game of Warhammer 40K. Now, in 7th edition, one of the cool new things about 7th edition is you can actually take a limited number of charts, providing you meet the minimum criteria for each chart, and that you stay equal to or less than the number of points designated for the game. That being said, today we'll just be a single list, and we'll just go over the rules of designing a list. So, basically, models or squads in Warhammer 40K 7th edition are divided into one of 7 categories depending on the role they fulfill in a game of Warhammer 40K. For a normal game of Warhammer 40K, there is a minimum requirement for 2 of the slots, and that is the HQ or headquarters slot and the troop slot. You are required to take in a normal game, unless you have a codex that has a different Force Organization chart, you're required to take at least 1 HQ and at least 2 troops choices. Now let's go over the different Force Organization chart slots. First up are the HQs, or headquarters as they're full called, but typically everyone just calls them HQs. As I just mentioned, you're required to take at least 1 HQ in a normal game of Warhammer 40K, and typically the maximum that you can take is 2 HQs in a normal game, in a normal Force Organization chart. And these HQs are the lords of your army. They are your leaders. They typically are the best of the best. They have the special rules which give your army special rules, and 1 HQ is designated as the warlord, which further gives even more special rules to the army, but we'll be going over warlord traits in a future video. HQs can include legendary named characters, such as Belial here on the left-hand side, or generic leaders, such as the librarian on the right-hand side. Some of them may have names, some of them may not. And just so you guys know, named characters are typically restricted to only 1 per list. So, for example, Belial, if you want to take Belial as the leader of your Dark Angels army, you only have 1 Belial in a list. You can't have 2 Belials, because that's just craziness. Up next, we have the elite slot. Now, as the name suggests, elites are just really good at a specific purpose. Typically, they're either very good at shooting or very good in close combat. They're just like the troops, but better. And you can have up to 3 elite slots in your army in a normal detachment. That being said, you are not required to take any, so the minimum is 0. So it's up to you whether or not you want to take any elites in your army. Elites could include this Purifier, or a Purifier squad of at least 5 members of Purifier squads. They have some really nice psychic powers, and they are excellent at shooting. Or it could include a Terminator squad, represented by this Deathwing Terminator in the middle for the Dark Angels army. And the Deathwing can actually be taken as troops if you took Belial, but that's a different story altogether. We'll be going over that in just a moment. And finally, elites could include this Hive Guard for the Tyranid army. Hive Guard are very good at shooting, and they're typically required to pop tanks or destroy tanks in Warhammer 40K speak. Up next, we have the troops. Now, the troops are the core of a Warhammer 40K army. You are required to have at least 2 troops choices for a normal Force Organization chart, and you can have up to 6 in a normal Force Organization chart. These could include these Tactical Marines for the Dark Angel army. They're not amazing, but they're very good standard troops. They're nothing too special, but they are the core of your army. They represent the most commonly available soldiers in your army. It should be worth mentioning that troops and some elite choices have the ability to take vehicles in Warhammer 40K. For example, Deathwing Terminators can take Land Raiders, a very large tank, as a dedicated transport. What does a dedicated transport mean? And what dedicated transports are essentially a vehicle that does not take up a Force Organization chart, and for purposes of the rules, they count as the same Force Organization chart as whatever squad they are transporting, but they don't actually take up a slot. So you could have 3 squads of Terminators in your elite slots, all of them with Land Raiders for the Deathwing as dedicated transports, and that will not take up any extra slots. Up next, we have the fast attack choices, and as the name suggests, these guys are fast. Typically, they have some war gear such as jump packs, or motorcycles, or they're on top beasts, or they're just really fast vehicles that allow them to get across the battlefield with ease. They're very maneuverable and very quick. They may not hit the hardest, but they will get there the quickest and be a great unit for an alpha strike on your opponent. They could include models such as these Ravenwing bikers for the Dark Angel army. As you can see, they are on motorcycles, and these guys get to move twice as fast as the normal troops choices in their army. So they're very quick, and they can get where you need them with relative ease and take out your opponent. And in a normal detachment, you are allowed between 0 and 3 squads of fast attacks. So up to 3 squads, but you are not required to take any in a normal force organization chart. Up next, the heavy support choices. These guys are typically my favorite. They are the heavy hitting choices of your army. They are big, they are bad, and they hit really hard. And you can take between 0 and 3 heavy support choice slots. So you're not required to take any, but you can only take up to 3. And they can include such giant monster creatures as this Eldar Wraith Knight, or a heavy-hitting squad of guys carrying giant weapons, such as this Devastator squad for the Dark Angels. They could be giant walkers, like this Morkanaut for the Orc army. Or they could just be a heavy-hitting tank, such as this Land Raider for the Grey Knights army. And as I mentioned, Land Raiders can actually be taken as dedicated transports if you don't want them to take up a heavy support choice. But as I mentioned, these guys, they can be sometimes slower than the normal heavy support choice, but they are super strong and they hit very hard. So they're a fun choice to have in your army. And on a side note, HQs can sometimes have the ability to move around your force organization chart. Some HQs, for example, can, if you bring a certain HQ, you can bring an elite or a heavy or a fast attack as a troops choice. And trust me, you want to bring them as a troops choice if you can, because troop choice are always a great choice. They can score objectives and prevent other armies from scoring them, and it frees up some slots that you can use with other choices for those slots. So if you have the ability to take fast attack, elite, or heavy support as troops, it might be ideal to do so for a specific HQ. Up next, we have Lords of War. Now, Lords of War are a relatively new addition to the Force Organization chart for Warhammer 40K, and they can include legendary fighters, such as Lord Keldor Drago for the Grey Knights, or Ghazghkull Thraka for the Orcs. They can also include giant hulking titans, which cost about half your army in points and will destroy pretty much everything on the battlefield. And you're allowed to take up to 1 Force Organization chart worth of Lords of War, but you're not required to take any. So it's between 0 and 1. And finally, the last slot is Fortifications, such as this Basilica Administratum. And basically, bringing a fortification allows you to do is, you can literally bring your own piece of terrain and you can position it wherever you want in your half of the deployment zone and keep your guys alive and safe, and that way guarantees you guys a certain amount of cover, and these items can typically help your plan in a normal game of 40k. The most commonly brought one is the Aegis Defense Line, because it provides cover for a large amount of troops. But that being said, people can bring landing pads or buildings or anything. There's a bunch of choices, so definitely check those out. They're not necessarily required. The amount you can bring is between 0 and 1 fortifications, so you're not required to take any, and you can take up to 1. So up to you if you want to bring them. Some people do, some people don't. It's up to you. And if you're curious as to what particular force organization slot does a model or a squad go into, please consult the codex for your army. In it, you'll find that each group is broken down by force organization slot, and you can check it out accordingly. So, now that we have gone through the 7 different force organization slots, let's go ahead and design a 1,000-point army. Now, for purposes of this example, we'll be using the Dark Angels Codex, which is a 6th edition codex. So they don't have any choices for Lords of War, but we will be designing a completely legal 1,000-point list in which we will be trying to encompass at least one of every of the force organization slots minus fortifications. So we're going to have an HQ, elite, 2 troops, because that's the minimum, is 1 HQ, 2 troops, a fast attack, and a heavy support. So let's go ahead and design our lists. Plus, I will also be covering how to add points into your list, for example, through weaponry or upgrades, and show you how to do so and calculate points accordingly. So today, we will be building a 1,000-point list of Dark Angels. Now, whenever building a list, you cannot go over the amount of points required for the game. So if you're playing a 1,000-point game, which is a very, very small game, most normal games of 40k are between 1,500 and 2,000 points, you cannot go over 1,000 points. So the goal is to get as close to 1,000 points as you can without going over, because you want to use as many points as you can to build your list, but you cannot go over because that would be cheating. So without further ado, we'll get to building our army, starting with the HQ. Also of note, when you're creating a list, for each unit or model in your army, you will be seeing a base points cost associated with that model or squad, as well as a variety of options that you can potentially give them to upgrade them and make them better. But with each of those upgrades, there's a potential cost. And what you do is you simply add the cost of the upgrade to the base cost of the model. And we'll be doing this throughout our list building exercise today in this video. So let's begin. For our HQs today, we're going to be bringing 2 HQ slots. The first one is this Company Master, which the base cost of a Company Master for the Dark Angels army is 90 points. But as you can see, the model is carrying a power sword. So to make the model correct with its points costs, we are going to replace its normal sword with a power sword. And that costs 15 points. So what you do is you add the 15 points to the base cost of the model. So now the new points cost of this particular Company Master is 105 points. For our second HQ slot, we will be bringing a Dark Angels Librarian. As you can see, this is a librarian carrying a force sword. His base cost is 65 points, but just to add an extra layer of psychic awesomeness, we will be upgrading his psychic mastery level from level 2 to level 3 for an additional 35 points. Now, once again, if you're wondering about all these upgrade costs, please consult your codex. Within an entry for each guy, there may be options for upgrading. For the elite slot, we will be bringing 1 squad of Deathwing Terminators, led by a sergeant with 4 guys in the squad, all of which have power fists and storm bolters. And we'll be covering more about the weapons in future videos. In the Dark Angels Codex, it states that the base cost of this squad is 220 points. But for every 5 members in the squad, 1 particular member can carry a Cyclone missile launcher, which will add some heavy shooting power to the squad. That costs 25 points. So today we'll be adding this to the squad, like so. And now the new squad cost is going to be 245 points. For our troops choices today, as I mentioned before, we are required to take 2 troops choices. So what we're going to do is take 2, what they're called tactical squads. These are the base Space Marines, and therefore the Dark Angels army. So we're going to be taking 2 squads of 10 members in a tactical squad, led by a sergeant. And this sergeant has a plasma pistol, which is a 15-point upgrade. Now for the squad itself, there's the option of replacing 1 guy with a bolter with 1 guy with a plasma gun. Once again, a plasma gun has much better firepower than a bolt gun, and I'll be covering over these guns in future videos. And for each squad, that will cost 15 points each. So now, the base cost used to be 140, and now it is 170 points per squad, totaling 340 points for this particular section of the force organization chart. For our fast attack choices, we'll be bringing 1 squad of 3 Ravenwing Bikers, led by a sergeant with 2 other guys. And just for simplicity purposes, we're not going to do any upgrades. Base cost of the squad is 80 points, and that's what the final cost of the squad will be. So 80 more points goes into our total for the force organization chart. And finally, we are going to put in a squad of 5 Devastators for the heavy support choice. And Devastators have the ability to take some serious heavy weapons. So what we're going to do is, it says this in the codex, we can replace up to 4 of them, their normal bolters, with plasma cannons, which are way more fun to shoot than bolters. Bolters are kind of the standard firing power gun of the Space Marines. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace these 4 bolters with 4 plasma cannons. Each replacement of a plasma cannon over a stone bolter costs 15 points. So because of all 4 of them, it's now up to 60 points for the upgrade costs. The new points of the squad is 130 points. So now that we've gone through all of the force organization slots that we'll be including today in our army, we can add up the points. And as you can see here, you add up all these points and you get to 1,000 points on the dot. So that's great. We're playing a 1,000-point game, so you might as well have 1,000 points. And that is essentially how to create an army for Warhammer 40K. All you do is start off with the base costs. If you want to add options, feel free. You just need to incorporate the cost associated with those options and try to stay as close to the points cost as possible, but you cannot go over. Going over is bad, very bad. And that's 1,000 points of Dark Angel's Awesomeness. And I really hope you enjoyed this episode of how to play Warhammer 40K. So now that we've covered how to build a list, the next video will cover all the things you need to do to set up a game of Warhammer 40K before you begin. So thank you so much for watching this episode of how to play Warhammer 40K. Stay tuned for more episodes because there are definitely going to be some. Until next time, this is Jay saying, happy playing and happy painting.